Boldwood presents Valour, written by Richard Cullen and read by Mark Meadows. Preface. In 1211, King András II of Hungary, seeking to secure his eastern borderlands, extended an invitation to the Order of St. Mary, commonly known as the Teutonic Knights, to settle in the frontier region called the Burzenland. This strategic move aimed to establish a military presence along the vulnerable Carpathian Mountain passes, which had long served as invasion routes for the Kipchak Turks, known to medieval Europeans as Cumans. Hermann von Salza, Grand Master of the Order of St. Mary, recognizing both the opportunity and challenge presented by this wilderness territory, acted swiftly upon receiving the royal charter. Within a short period, 5 stone fortresses had been positioned strategically along the mountain range. These imposing structures served as both defensive bastions and symbols of Christian authority extending into formerly contested lands. To solidify their presence and develop the region economically, the Order also initiated a settlement program, inviting German colonists from their homeland to establish communities throughout the Burzenland. By the early 1220s, the threat of Cuman attacks, which had previously terrorized the region, diminished significantly under the vigilant watch of the Order. This military success extended beyond merely repelling raids and reached into Cuman society itself, with several clans abandoning their traditional nomadic lifestyle and ancestral religious practices to accept Christianity. However, not all Cuman clans embraced these changes. By 1223, some clans remained steadfastly committed to their pagan beliefs and nomadic way of life, but as a result, their position became more precarious. Not only were their traditional raiding routes into Hungary now blocked by Christian fortresses, but their ancestral territories in Cumania faced mounting pressure from a formidable new threat emerging from the east. Prologue. Cumania, 1223 AD. The wind growled across the plain like a wounded beast, whipping sparks from the campfires. Shoruk watched those fires dance, each ember a dying light that heralded only ill fortune for the clan of the White Wolf. Yurts dotted the flattened grass, their felt walls straining against the gale that swept down from the distant Carpathians. The horses shifted restlessly in their pickets, huddled together against the chill, long manes flowing in the bitter wind. Once there would have been hundreds of mounts, enough to shake the earth with their thunder when the clan rode to war. Now barely 50 remained, their ribs showing beneath winter-thick coats. Shoruk pulled his fur-lined cloak closer. The wind carried the familiar scent of horse, roast game, and charred wood, but something was missing. The laughter and songs that had once filled their camps had grown quiet in recent years, replaced by the fear of what lay beyond every horizon. To the northwest, beyond the distant peaks of the Carpathian Mountains, Christian armies had stolen their hunting grounds. Year after year, they pushed further east, building their stone fortresses, clearing forests for their farms, erecting their crosses of wood and iron. Those warriors brought their armored horses and their accursed god, driving the clan ever eastward like wolves before a forest fire. Their white cloaks were stained with Cuman blood. Their swords had drunk deep of so many warriors Shoruk had called brothers that his hatred for them knew no bounds. He spat into the dirt. 10 years ago, they would have fought. 10 years ago, Chief Tarkan would have led them in a glorious charge, arrows blackening the sky as they fell upon their enemies like a storm. Shoruk's grandfather had told of such victories, how the clan had made its enemies flee in terror, how they had burned their wooden dwellings and scattered their flocks. But their chief had grown old, cautious, weak. Now they fled at the first sight of those steel-clad devils who guarded the way to the west. Shoruk's gaze shifted across the fire to where Tarkan was seated, his weathered face lined with shadows cast by those dancing flames, his hands trembling slightly as he warmed them. The chief's once proud shoulders had begun to stoop, though he still carried himself with the dignity of his station. His coat was richly decorated with patterns of wolves and eagles, but the embroidery was faded, the fabric worn thin in places. Like the clan itself, it was naught but a shadow of former glory. "Remember when we would share tales of victory on nights like this?" Shoruk asked, unable to keep his peace any longer. "How we would boast of the warriors we had killed, the villages we had raided. Now we speak only of where to run next." Tarkan's eyes remained fixed on the fire, their dark depths reflecting the dancing flames. "Better to run and live than die needlessly, my bold friend. Stories of dead heroes warm no one." "Is that what we've become? Rabbits, darting from burrow to burrow?" Shoruk gestured at the scant yurts. "Look at us! Once we were the terror of the plains. Now we can barely feed ourselves through winter." "We do what we must to survive." Tarkan's voice carried the weight of too many hard decisions, too many retreats, too many dead friends. "But fear not. The world changes, whether we wish it or no. Even the great river must bend around the mountain. And perhaps I have found a way for us all to survive." A horse's whinny cut through the night, followed by shouts of greeting from the sentries posted at the camp's edge. Shoruk rose in one fluid motion, hand instinctively moving to his sword hilt as hoofbeats thundered closer, and the guards' torches illuminated the approach of a lone rider. The horse was lathered with sweat despite the cold, sides heaving as the warrior reined to a halt. Both beast and man bore the marks of hard travel. The man's face was wind-burned and gaunt, his eyes wide and so haunted they made Shoruk's hand tighten on his weapon until he recognized it was Boril, a scout they had sent east for news. Tarkan stood, suddenly looking every bit the chieftain he had once been, despite his age. His back straightened, his chin lifted, and for a moment Shoruk saw the warrior who had led them through many hard years. "Speak," Tarkan commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a chief. Boril slid from his saddle, his legs nearly buckling as he dropped to one knee. His horse stood trembling, steam rising from its flanks. More of the clan gathered around the fire, drawn by the commotion. "Great chief," Boril gasped, "I bring word from the east. The Kalka River runs red with the blood of our people. The plains are black with corpses, Cuman and Rus alike." "Stand, my brother Boril," Tarkan said. "Tell us your tale." "The followers of the Khan, Chinggis, have pushed westward. They faced the kingdoms of the Rus at the river. The princes united to face this horde, but were defeated, slaughtered and routed. The great chief Khoten of the Terteroba clan fled for his life, his warriors cut down like wheat before the scythe. So many dead. Thousands. The Eastern Khan's horsemen, they are like nothing we have ever faced. They gave no quarter, showed no mercy. The heads of so many of those princes now adorn their banner poles, their eyes pecked out by crows." Shoruk's fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. "How many survived?" he demanded, though he dreaded the answer. "Too few." Boril's eyes were haunted, seeing again the horrors he had witnessed. "Those princes of the Rus who were captured were buried alive and suffocated as the Khan's generals feasted atop their dying bodies. But Chief Cullen lives. He does, Boril replied. Then we must ride east, Shoruk declared, turning to Tarkan. Join with him and the surviving clans. Face this threat together as we always have. United, we can— No. Tarkan's voice was quiet but firm. No? Shoruk struggled to contain his anger, aware of the many eyes watching their exchange. Our brothers cry out for aid, and you would abandon them? Have you forgotten all the times they stood with us against our enemies? Our future lies to the west. Tarkan spoke with the finality of one who had already made his decision. The west? Where the Christians block every pass? Where they build their stone nests and cut down any of our people who dare to cross their borders? Yes. Tarkan met his gaze, unflinching. The very same. Shoruk leaned in close so the others might not hear. Have you lost your mind, great chief? They would sooner put us to the sword than not if we embrace their god. Shoruk stared at Tarkan, certain he had misheard. The wind seemed to die away, leaving only the crackling of the fire and the labored breathing of the exhausted Boril. What did you say? Shoruk replied, barely believing what he had heard. Tarkan let out a great sigh, his face looking resigned. It seems it is time. Gather the clan, all of them. They must hear this now. One of the warriors, Darman, took out his horn and blew, its deep note carrying on the bitter wind. The sound was both familiar and ominous, the call that had summoned them to war and to mourn their fallen. Shoruk watched as they emerged from their yurts, men, women, and children, drawn by the summons. The firelight caught on faces that showed varying degrees of concern and curiosity as they gathered in a rough circle with Tarkan at its heart. Even now, with the prospect of dire news, there was something in his bearing that commanded attention. People of the White Wolf clan, Tarkan began. For generations, we have followed the way of our fathers. We have worshipped Tengri in the endless blue sky above, and Eje in the earth beneath our feet. Our ancestors watch us from the stars. Their spirits ride with us in battle. Their wisdom guides our steps. But the world changes, and we must change with it, or perish. Mutters rippled through the gathering, warriors shifting uneasily as if sensing an unseen threat. Shoruk felt his jaw tighten as he prepared for Tarkan to deliver the gravest of tidings. We have heard news from the distant Kalka River. Our eastern brothers lie dead or scattered, their blood feeding the grass, their bones picked clean by wolves. The horse lords of the Khan who defeated them will not stop there. They will push west, as surely as winter follows autumn. Tarkan's gaze swept the crowd, meeting eyes both young and old. We cannot defeat them alone. We need allies, strong allies, with stone walls and steel armor. The Christians? Someone called out. Artak, one of Shoruk's most trusted warriors. But they are our enemies. They have killed our brothers, stolen our lands, profaned our sacred places. It is the only way, Tarkan replied, with the patience of a father explaining harsh truths to a child. I have already sent word to their priests, and they have replied to that word with hope. A holy woman is coming to show us the way of their God. She will teach us their customs, their prayers, their chains, Shoruk's voice sounded harsh even to himself. "You would have us abandon our gods? The gods who have protected us since our forefathers tamed the first horse? You would have us kneel to these foreign priests who call us savages, who claim their god is the only true one? I would have us live." Tarkan's tone had hardened, taking on the edge that had once commanded men in battle. "The Christian warriors are strong. Their fortresses stand against any attack. Their armies grow larger each year. If we join them, accept their faith, we can keep our lands, our horses, our way of life." "What's life?" Shoruk spat, taking a step forward. "As their dogs? Dancing to their tune, while they strip everything that makes us who we are? Better to die with enough!" Tarkan bellowed, silencing Shoruk, the crowd. Even the wind seemed to quell at his thunder. "The decision has been made. As chief of the clan of the White Wolf, it is mine to make. Would you defy me, Shoruk?" All eyes were on him now. But could he? Would he stand against the man who had been as a father to him for all his life, a father to them all? Shoruk lowered his gaze, offering an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "What I do for the good of us all," Tarkan said, his voice softening once again. "I do it for our survival. Now go, sleep. Tomorrow we travel west toward the mountains, where we will join a new road. One where we might at least find hope." The crowd dispersed, breaking into small groups that buzzed with conversation. Some cast fearful glances at the sky, as if expecting Tengri himself to strike them down for even considering such blasphemy. Others huddled close to the fires, speaking in low voices of practical concerns, of survival, of change, of the future that seemed to grow darker with each passing day. For his part, Shoruk stormed away from the firelight, his shadow stretching long and dark before him across the cold ground, each step carrying him further from the man he had once called father in all but blood. The fury in his chest burned hotter than any fire, threatening to consume him from within. "Your anger burns bright tonight, warrior, like a flaming star fallen to the earth." The voice froze him in place, sending ice through his veins despite his rage. Moldir emerged from the shadows, her black robes making her seem part of the night itself. Even after years of knowing the old woman, Shoruk had to fight the urge to retreat from her like a spooked horse. The high priestess's eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. The cold burn of the void between stars, the chill of the tomb. She was a servant of the old ways, the Kam Katun of the clan of the White Wolf, who spoke with spirits that were best left unnamed. "You heard?" he asked. "I hear everything." Her lips curved in what might have been a smile, showing teeth that seemed too sharp in the darkness. But of course she had heard. The birds were her spies, the winds carried whispers to her ears. "Tengri will not forgive this betrayal easily. The sky god's wrath will shake the mountains themselves." "Then we must stop this madness. But Tarkan—" Shoruk trailed off, unable to voice the thought that had been growing in his mind since his chief's announcement. "The old wolf has lost his teeth." Moldir stepped closer. "Perhaps it is time for new blood. Someone strong. Someone who still hears the voices of the true gods." The implication hung in the air between them, and Shoruk felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. What you suggest is necessary. Her hand touched his arm, cold even through the leather. But do not fear, warrior. The gods themselves will guide your hand. The spirits hunger for sacrifice, and they are ready to reward those with enough courage to deliver it. She melted back into the darkness, like a nightmare fading at dawn, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Or almost alone. Movement caught his eye, and he turned to see Talcin, Moldir's young priestess, watching from the shadows. Her expression was unreadable in the darkness, but he felt the weight of her gaze. Did she realize the import of what had just transpired, what had been decided in the dark? Shoruk turned back toward the camp, where Tarkan stood by the fire, outlined against the flames like a statue. The old chief's shoulders were bowed, as if already bearing the weight of his decision. Once, Shoruk would have died to protect him. Now, he wondered if his blade would be sharp enough to sever the bonds of loyalty forged over so many years of battle and brotherhood. But in his heart, he knew the choice had already been made. Their gods had to be honored, even if the price was betrayal. Part 1. Into the Wild. Burzenland, 1223 AD. Chapter 1. The scent of roasting pork carried on the autumn air, along with the sound of revelry. Estienne stood at the edge of the village square, watching the settlers in their festival attire mingle with visiting traders. The women wore their finest kirtles in autumn colors, russet gold and forest green, while the men had donned clean tunics and freshly polished boots. Towering above, Rosenau fortress rose from its rocky perch, watching over them all like a sentinel, its grey walls catching the last light of the fading sun. Those walls were the only reason such festivities were possible in this place. Beyond them lay the wild passes of the Carpathians, where danger lurked at every turn. But here, in the shadow of that fortress, the villagers could forget for a time that they lived on the very edge of Christendom's grace. Estienne had stood guard on those walls enough times to know every crenel and merlon, every arrow slit and murder hole. From the highest tower, you could see for leagues in every direction. West across the Burzenland towards the settled lands of Hungary, and east over the mountain peaks toward the wilderness of Cumania. The sight always reminded him of how precarious their position was, this tiny outpost of civilization clinging to the edge of the Christian world. A cheer went up as two farmers faced off in a makeshift arena, each gripping one end of a long saw. Their muscles strained as they worked the blade through a thick oak log, sawdust falling like snow. The blade's teeth sang against the wood with each push and pull, adding its voice to the general din of the festival, as nearby, two teams of men dug their heels into the earth for a tug of war, the hemp rope creaking under the tension as they strained against each other. Children darted between the legs of the crowd, playing some game that involved much shrieking and laughter. Their high voices carried over the general hubbub of merchants hawking their wares, women gossiping by wine barrels, men arguing good-naturedly over the contests. A small boy crashed into Estienne's legs, then looked up at his towering height with wide eyes before scampering away. No time to offer a reassuring smile or ruffle the lad's hair before he fled. It reminded Estienne of how much he was changed from the youth he'd been in England. He adjusted the white surcoat he wore, conscious of how it marked him as different, even here among his fellow knights. Where his brothers in the Order of St. Mary wore the black cross on white, his surcoat bore a black lion instead. He was a halbbrüder, in the language of the order, half-brother. Not quite one of them, but still a valued friend. The distinction felt especially sharp on days like this, when the Knights of St. Mary mingled so easily with the common folk they protected. "You look like you're ready for battle, Wace." Amalric appeared at his side, offering a clay mug of beer and his usual easy smile. "Maybe try enjoying yourself for once?" Old habits. Estienne accepted the drink, letting the bitter ale wash down his dry throat. The local brew was dark and strong, with a hint of honey, and he almost gasped at how good it tasted. "Someone has to keep watch while everyone else makes merry. That's what those walls are for." Amalric gestured towards Rosenau with his mug. "And the men walking them. Even God rested on the seventh day." "God didn't have the pagans for neighbors," Estienne replied dryly. Amalric laughed, the sound genuine despite the grim truth of the words. "You're right there." He took a long pull from his mug. "But the horse nomads have been quiet lately. Too quiet, some would say. And that's what worries me." Estienne watched a pair of merchants haggling over the price of wool, their animated gestures drawing laughs from onlookers. They're always quietest before the storm. A chorus of cheers drew their attention toward the arena, where a group of villagers was now attempting to lift increasingly heavy stones. Each success was marked with shouts and raised drinks, each failure with good-natured jeering. The largest stone, a rounded boulder that must have weighed as much as a small pony, stood unconquered at the end of the row. "Berthold, the miller's son, has been boasting he can lift the heaviest one," said Amalric, nodding toward a stocky young man warming up at the edge of the crowd. The youth was built like the millstones he helped his father turn, all solid muscle earned through honest labor. 5 copper pennies, says he can't get it past his knees. "I don't take bets I know I'll lose." Estienne watched as another competitor failed to budge the stone. The man's face had turned red as a beet with effort, veins standing out on his neck, but the boulder didn't shift an inch. "Knights of St. Mary!" a voice called out from the crowd. "Surely you'll show us how it's done?" Estienne suddenly realized all eyes were turning toward them. More voices joined in, calling for the knights to demonstrate their strength, and Estienne felt sudden discomfort in the light of such attention. They were meant to be the protectors of these people, not entertainment for them. But when he glanced at the eager faces in the crowd, he saw no mockery there, only admiration, and perhaps a desire to see their defenders as men of flesh and blood, rather than distant watchmen on the walls. "Come on," Amalric said quietly. "What harm a little friendly competition? Besides, I've been wanting to prove I can best you at something." "Well, there's a first time for everything," Estienne replied with a grin. The pair made their way forward into the makeshift arena. Estienne shrugged off his surcoat and tunic, the autumn air raising gooseflesh on his bare arms. A murmur ran through the crowd at the sight of the scars that crossed his body, old wounds that told their own tales. Those stones waited in the center of the arena, 4 of them, each successively larger and heavier than the last. The first one came up to Estienne's shins, and he bent his legs, got his arms around it, and lifted. Though heavy, it came up smoothly to his chest. He held it there a moment before setting it down with a thud. Amalric matched him easily, to the delight of the crowd, then turned with his usual bright smile. "That wasn't so difficult." Estienne didn't reply, saving his breath for the task at hand. The second stone was half again as large as the first. This time Amalric went first, wrapping his arms around it carefully. His face reddened with effort as he raised it, muscles trembling slightly, before he managed to get it to chest height. Estienne followed, hoisting the stone upward. The weight tried to pull him forward, threatening his balance, but he held it steady. "Still think this is easy?" he asked through gritted teeth. This time it was Amalric's turn to save his breath. The third stone drew worried murmurs from the crowd. Nearly knee-high, it squatted in the dirt like a sleeping beast. Neither man spoke now. The challenge had grown beyond friendly competition. Estienne attacked it first, legs spread wide for balance. The stone resisted, then slowly began to rise. Every muscle burned as he fought to control the weight. With a final surge of strength, he managed to get it to his chest, holding it just long enough to stir the crowd into a flurry of applause before letting it drop. "Ready to yield yet?" he asked, trying to hide how much the effort had cost him. Amalric didn't reply immediately, studying the stone like a general planning a siege. When he finally moved, it was with precision, his back straight, knees bent, chin raised. His technique served him well. The stone came up smoothly, though sweat streamed down his face and his arms shook with the strain. Then he dropped the stone with a gasp and stepped back, chest heaving. The two knights faced each other, both breathing hard, neither willing to concede defeat. The final stone waited, a monster that looked like it had been torn from the mountains themselves. "I'm starting to wonder if this was such a good idea," Amalric murmured under his breath. "No turning back now, my friend," Estienne replied, advancing on the monstrous boulder. He knelt, grasping it, straining until the veins stood out on his neck like cords, but the stone refused to budge even an inch off the ground. The attempt left him gasping, his arms trembling with exhaustion. In his turn, Amalric fared no better, his well-practiced technique useless against such an immovable mass. Just as the crowd began to voice their disappointment, a shadow fell across the arena, and a deep laugh rolled out like distant thunder. Rotger Havenblast stood watching them fail, his massive frame blocking the setting sun. The newest knight of the order was built like a bear, with hands like hammers and shoulders that seemed wide enough to carry the world. His surcoat strained across his chest, the black cross distorted by the sheer bulk of muscle beneath. "May I?" he asked, still chuckling. Without waiting for an answer, he stepped up to the stone. His laugh faded to a grunt of effort as he wrapped his arms around it and tested its weight. Then the impossible happened. The stone began to rise. Rotger's face turned red, his teeth bared in a grimace that could have been a smile, as the stone came up past his knees, then his waist, then finally to his chest. The muscles in his neck stood out like guy ropes, and his breath came in short, sharp gasps. He held the vast stone there for a heartbeat before letting it crash back to earth, the impact sending tremors through the ground that Estienne felt in his feet. The crowd's cheers were deafening. Someone started a chant of "Rotger! Rotger!" that quickly spread through the gathering, and the big knight accepted their praise with a bashful grin. "God's blood," Amalric breathed, shaking his head in amazement. "That man's a beast." "Aye, just count your blessings he's on our side," Estienne added. As the cheers rose to a crescendo, the thunder of hooves cut through the celebration, and the crowd parted as Carsten Shadow rode into the square. The man's perpetual scowl seemed deeper than usual, his balding head flushed with what might have been anger or exertion. "Enough of this foolishness," he spat, eyes fixed on Estienne and Amalric's bare chests with obvious disapproval. "Have you forgotten your duties? Or perhaps you think the defense of Christendom can wait while you cavort like common farmhands?" The festive atmosphere deflated. Children who had been playing nearby scurried away from Carsten's harsh voice, and the villagers began to drift from the arena. Even the pig on its spit seemed to turn more slowly, as though trying not to draw attention to itself. "Come now, brother Carsten," said old Stephen the carpenter, stepping forward with a mug of beer extended in offering. "Surely even the men of your order can spare an afternoon for the harvest celebrations. The day is a fine one, the beer is flowing." "The day is wasting," Carsten cut him off, ignoring the offered drink. "And we have more important matters to attend to than childish games." Estienne stiffened at the insult in Carsten's tone. The man had never fought a real battle, never stood shoulder to shoulder with common men against a common enemy, yet he spoke to them as though he were their lord. He was the son of a rich merchant, given his position in return for a generous donation to the order's coffers. So generous, it had seen Carsten gifted the rank of Comtour. A senior office he didn't deserve, and Estienne would have told him as much, but Amalric's hand on his arm kept him silent. "Marshal Dieter has sent word ahead of his imminent arrival," Carsten continued, his voice carrying across the now quiet square. "He is bringing important missionaries from France, who intend to spread the light of God to one of the pagan clans. A holy woman of the church, accompanied by Dominican friars, no less. She will be received with all due ceremony and respect, by order of the Hochmeister himself." His gaze swept across the gathered knights, as though challenging any of them to question his authority. Rotger's good humour had faded, replaced by a hangdog expression that ill-suited his massive frame. Likewise, Amalric's smile had reduced to a set jaw. Together, they retrieved their tunics and surcoats, and followed Carsten's strutting steed back toward Rosenau. Estienne cast one last look at the square. The villagers were already starting to pack away their stalls, the joy of the day soured by Carsten's interference. But perhaps for the best. The jollity of a festival day could not last forever, especially not with the threat of what lurked just beyond those mountains. Whoever these approaching missionaries were, they must have possessed a staunch faith indeed to try and shed the light of Christianity beyond the Carpathians. Chapter 2. Estienne shifted his weight and adjusted the white surcoat, bearing his black lion. The wind cut through the fabric, but he still stood unmoving. Around him, the other knights of the order were like statues, their black crosses stark against their white mantles. Only their breath, rising in pale clouds, betrayed any sign of life. "Here they come!" Carsten barked across the courtyard. Estienne glanced through the open gates, seeing distant riders appear against the frost-covered landscape. Marshal Dieter von Goslar led the party, his massive destrier's hooves kicking up clods of earth. Behind him rode a woman on a white palfrey, flanked by two brown-robed friars who looked as comfortable on horseback as fish in a tree. As the group rode within the confines of the castle walls, he could see the woman sitting straight-backed in her saddle, despite what must have been an exhausting journey. Her travelling clothes simple but well made. Though her face bore the lines of middle age, there was a keenness in her blue eyes as she surveyed the fortress. A wooden rosary was wrapped around one gloved fist, and unlike her nervous companions, she carried herself with a quiet confidence. Carsten stepped forward. "Welcome to Rosenau, honored guests. I am Comtour Carsten Shadow." "Thank you for your welcome, Comtour," the woman replied, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. She dismounted with surprising grace, the two friars scrambling to follow her example. "I am Fabrisse of Avallon, duly appointed as Christian envoy by the Bishop of Acre." These are brothers Gallien and Rabel. The shorter of the two friars, Gallien, Estienne presumed, offered a jerky bow, his tonsured head shining with sweat despite the cold. His companion simply stared at the fortress walls as though he had never seen anything so imposing. Carsten offered a bow of his own. "We are honored to—" "Show the lady to her quarters," the marshal ordered, cutting across whatever Carsten had been about to say. "She and her companions will need rest after their journey. And see that fires are lit in their rooms. The road has been a bitterly cold one." Carsten's face reddened, but he gestured for a pair of serving brothers to lead the visitors away. As they disappeared into the keep, Amalric leaned in closer to Estienne. "She must have powerful friends in Rome," his friend whispered. "The order doesn't usually extend such courtesies to wandering missionaries." "Powerful friends won't help her beyond those walls." Estienne watched as stable boys led the horses away. "The pagans don't care how many bishops you know when they're peeling the skin from your bones." "Perhaps she'll reconsider once she's heard the night wolves howling," Rutger offered hopefully. "Nothing sends missionaries running back to civilization faster than a night at the edge of the frontier." "Let's hope that she does," Estienne replied, "though I doubt it. There's something in her eyes, the look of someone who won't be turned aside easily." "Dismissed!" Carsten bellowed before they could talk further. As the other knights of the order filed away, Estienne could only gaze toward the keep where Fabrisse had disappeared, wondering what kind of conviction would make a woman willingly throw herself into the wilds for a chance to bring the light of God to those who would only do you harm. The great hall of Rosenau was hardly worthy of its name, just a long room with rough-hewn beams and arrow-slit windows that let in fingers of cold air. But the servants had done their best to make it welcoming, hanging tapestries to cover the bare stone walls and setting out the order's best pewter plates. The scent of roasted venison and sweet spices filled the air, mixing with the smoke from the hearth. Estienne sat between Amalric and Rutger, watching Carsten make another attempt to dominate the conversation. The Komtur had been holding forth about the challenges of maintaining order on the frontier for the better part of an hour, his voice growing louder with each cup of wine. His face had taken on the ruddy sheen that promised belligerence before the night was through. Estienne had been hoping the marshal would cut him down to size at some point, but Dieter had remained silent, most likely still fatigued after his recent travels. "Of course, one must be firm with the locals," Carsten said, gesturing with a half-empty cup. "They're little better than peasants, truth be told. Why, just last month, I had to have 3 of them reprimanded for failing to deliver their seasonal tithe of grain. You have to maintain discipline, you see. Show strength." "An interesting perspective," Fabrisse replied, delicately picking at her venison, "though I've often found that understanding breeds better results than a scolding." "Understanding?" Carsten laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the stone walls. "My lady, you don't know these people. They're—"
"I know them perfectly well. They are children of the Lord, as are we all. Even those beyond the bounds of this fortress. Those pagans who wish to be embraced by Christendom."
"Those pagans are a different breed altogether. You'd have more luck trying to convert a wild beast."
"And yet, convert them I will," Fabrisse replied, so firmly it silenced the table. Carsten was dumbstruck for a moment, reminding Estienne of how unused he was to being contradicted.
"But how will you even accomplish such a thing? They speak no language we know."
"But thankfully I am well versed in all the Kipchak dialects, Komtur. Indeed, I have read much about them, But I would be interested in knowing what you have learned from the clans of the Cumans during your time here. What can you tell me of their ways?"
Her sudden question silenced Carsten, along with the rest of the table. Marshal Dieter shifted uncomfortably in his seat, though he had nothing to reply.
"Anyone?" she asked. "What about you?"
Her eyes settled on Estienne. He was surprised at being drawn into the conversation, but there was something about her that made him want to offer as best an answer as he could. "I've learned they're excellent shots with a bow," he replied dryly, "and that they prefer to attack when you least expect it. Usually just before dawn, when men are at their most tired." "Which is why this mission of yours is folly," Amalric said, then quickly added, "Begging your pardon, my lady." "You think bringing God's word to the heathens is foolish?" There was no anger in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "I think getting yourself killed serves no one," Amalric replied, pushing his plate away. "The Cumans are not like the peasants you're used to converting. They're warriors, raiders. They respect strength, not sermons." "Then it's fortunate that the word of our Lord is compelling indeed." Fabrice set down her cup, the metal making a soft ring against the wood.
"And that I have already arranged to meet with one of their clan chiefs. He and his people are most eager to be welcomed into the arms of Christ."
"It sounds like you have thought of everything," Amalric offered.
Fabrice smiled. "Perhaps not everything, but enough. The rest is in the hands of God."
"And the hands of the Cumans," Estienne added, unable to hold his tongue on the matter. "Let's hope they're as open to the word of God as they claim, for your sake."
"Indeed, I have prayed for it every day since I received word from their chieftain. In fact, I would pray for it now, before I retire for the evening. Would there be somewhere appropriate?"
Carsten shoved his chair back. "Indeed there is. I can show you the way. And perhaps we can further discuss—"
"The Lady of Avallon has heard enough of your blether, Shadow,"
the marshal said.
"Wace, you will escort her to the chapel."
Expectant eyes turned once more to Estienne. With no other choice, he rose and made his way toward the archway from the great hall, with Fabrice close behind. They proceeded through the castle in silence, but for the howl of the wind outside. Despite the Lady of Avallon holding no official rank within the church other than the blessing of a bishop, Estienne felt as though he were escorting some important dignitary, and kept a respectful silence as a consequence. The chapel of Rosenau was small. A crude wooden cross dominated the far wall, unadorned save for a crown of thorns someone had woven from local briars. The air was thick with the smell of tallow candles and old incense, underlaid with the musty scent of damp. "It's not much," Estienne said, suddenly conscious that even the smallest village church would have put this place to shame. "But it serves its purpose."
"God's house needs no ornament."
Fabrice moved to stand before the cross, her fingers teasing her rosary beads.
"Though I imagine it's quite different from the great cathedrals of England. York Minster, perhaps? Or Canterbury?"
"It's that obvious I'm from England."
"Your accent is hard to disguise. English with a hint of Anjou, though I can't tell which is the stronger."
She turned to face him, amusement dancing in her eyes.
"But your Deutsch is excellent."
"You have a good ear," he conceded grudgingly.
"I have good eyes, too."
She studied him in the flickering light, her gaze uncomfortably penetrating.
"When I look at you, I sense a man running from something. The question is, what has driven you so far from home?"
A long tale indeed, one he had no intention of sharing with anyone, not least a holy woman he barely knew. "We all have our reasons for being here."
"Indeed."
She returned her attention to the cross, reaching out to touch one of the thorns.
Though some reasons are worthier than others. Tell me, Estienne, what do you believe in?
I believe in brotherhood, he replied shortly. And I believe in steel.
And in God?
He's somewhere on the list, I suppose. She looked away, as though disappointed.
You have not put God above all things. I find that a little sad. How empty your world must be.
Better empty than filled with false hope that you can mold the world in God's image. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Forgive me, my lady, but you don't know what evil those pagans are capable of.
The things they do.
He trailed off, remembering what he had seen in the short time he'd manned this frontier garrison.
I know exactly what they're capable of, Fabrice replied quietly. I've studied their ways, their beliefs. They worship Tengri in the sky above and Ege in the earth below. They believe a man's worth is measured by his strength, his courage in battle. But they're not devils, Estienne. They're men, like any other. And men can change.
Not all men. I've seen too much evil to believe that.
Have you?
She stepped closer, and he fought the urge to step back.
Tell me, what did you witness in the Holy Land that made you so certain of men's nature? What broke your faith so completely?
How did you know?
I told you.
She smiled again.
I have good eyes.
Her insight made him feel suddenly ill at ease. That she should be able to read him so deftly made Estienne wonder what else she might have seen lurking within his soul. My faith was not broken, just cracked a little. I was raised to follow a code, to do the right thing, no matter the cost. But in the Holy Land, I saw men's principles clouded by greed, saw pious men abandon their faith for fortune, saw young men die in the name of God, only for it all to be for nothing.
And for that, you have abandoned that code in favor of this holy order?
In truth, Estienne barely knew. Had he forgotten the code taught to him by Geoffrey, instilled in him by the Marshal, or did he still cling to it? I have made no vows to the Order of St. Mary, but neither have I forgotten the lessons taught me by my master. Fabrice looked on with some sympathy.
It seems you are all at sea, Estienne Wace, a lost sailor in search of the shore.
I should leave you to your prayers, he said stiffly, suddenly feeling as though he were being put to the question. It's getting late.
Of course.
Her voice was gentle, almost maternal.
Though I think perhaps you could use some prayer yourself, Estienne. These lands are too dangerous for a man without faith.
And those beyond the mountains are more dangerous still.
What better reason than for us both to pray, then?
Perhaps another time, he replied, simply bowing before striding from the chapel. The night air hit him as he stepped out onto the walls of the castle, and he sucked in great lungfuls of it, trying to clear his head of unwanted memories. When he eventually made his way back to the great hall, it had emptied save for a handful of knights gathered around the feast table. Guttering candles cast uncertain life over the scraps of meat and bread, the spilled wine looking black as old blood on the tablecloth. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the arrow-slit windows whistle like distant battle horns. Carsten sat slouching, his face flushed with wine, while the Marshal maintained his usual stone-faced dignity. Amalric and Rodger occupied the bench opposite, the latter still picking at a half-stripped capon with remarkable dedication.
"Well?"
Carsten demanded as Estienne approached, his words slightly slurred.
"Is our holy woman settled in to pray for the night?"
"She's at her devotions," Estienne replied, dropping onto the bench beside Amalric. "For all the good it will do her beyond the mountain pass."
We shouldn't discourage these missionaries too strongly about the dangers, Carsten said, swirling the wine in his cup. After all, bringing God's light to the heathens is a noble calling. Perhaps this is a moment he has chosen to turn the rest of the Cumans from their savage ways, to bring them all into the fold of Holy Mother Church.
And perhaps your horse will sprout wings and fly you to the moon, Amalric muttered. We have a duty to warn them of what they're riding into, to discourage them from this foolish crusade.
Our duty is to the Order,
Carsten snapped, slamming his cup down.
And if the Order has decided to support this mission, the Order has decided to offer them hospitality,
the Marshal interrupted, his quiet voice brooking no argument.
Nothing more. What they choose to do beyond our walls is their own affair. Though God knows, they'll need more than prayers where they're going.
But surely we can't just let them ride to their deaths, Amalric protested. They have no idea what's waiting out there. She seems to think God will protect them, Estienne said, the memory of her penetrating gaze clear in his mind. Though I've yet to see faith stop an arrow or turn aside a blade. I'm with Amalric on this. We should— The Marshal pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the stone floor.
Enough. The decision isn't ours to make. The Lady of Avallon has insisted they travel alone. A military escort will only send the wrong message to the clan they intend to convert. Hers is a mission of peace, and we are to take no part in it, other than guiding them along the mountain pass to meet with the pagans.
An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Even Rotke stopped chewing. In the distance, a wolf howled, the sound carrying clearly through the arrow slits. It was answered by another, closer, and then a third. The Marshal rose, his shadow stretching across the table like a giant's.
Get some rest, all of you. Tomorrow may bring its own troubles.
As he strode from the hall, Estienne couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's troubles might arrive sooner than any of them expected. He reached for the wine jug again, but found it empty. Perhaps for the best. At least now he could face tomorrow's troubles with a clear head. Chapter 3. Dawn crept over the Carpathians, and Estienne watched those distant peaks emerge from darkness as he tightened his destrier's girth strap. The warhorse shifted restlessly, steam rising from its flanks in the morning air. Around him, the fortress courtyard buzzed with activity. Stable hands rushing back and forth, horses stamping and shying, weapons being given one final check before departure. I still think this is a damn fool thing to be doing, Amalric muttered from where he was securing his own mount's bridle. We are leading these people to their doom. It is not our place to make that judgment, brother, Estienne replied, stepping back from his mount. These orders come from the Hochmeister himself. Besides, the Lady of Avallon seems to know what she's doing. I get the sense God's watching over her, if he's watching over any of us. Rodke approached, leading his own horse, the massive destrier making even his bear-like frame seem modest in comparison.
Good morning for a ride, he said cheerfully,
apparently immune to both the cold and the general mood of tension.
The mist should burn off by midday. View along the pass will be a beautiful one.
Amalric grinned at the big knight's optimism. Estienne merely gazed up at the fortress walls, where tendrils of fog still clung. The moisture had left a sheen of frost on the stone that would melt and refreeze until spring, making the steps treacherous. Everything about this morning felt treacherous. The creak of the keep doors drew his attention. Fabrisse emerged, flanked by her holy companions.
She had traded her travelling clothes for a simple grey robe and white wimple, a wooden cross hanging at her throat. Friars Gallien and Rabel followed in their brown habits, looking decidedly less comfortable with the prospect of the journey ahead. "My lady," Estienne said with a slight bow as she approached, "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," she replied, "though the wind howls through these walls like nothing I've ever known." Before he could respond, Amalric appeared at his shoulder. "The horses are ready, and we have loaded supplies for 2 days." "We won't need supplies for 2 days," Brother Gallien interjected, his voice pitched slightly too high. "The Cuman camp is less than a day's ride." "Best to be prepared," Estienne replied. "There's no guarantee these Cumans will even show when they say. They're not known for their reliability. We might have to wait a while, and the weather in these mountains can change in an instant. You never know when you might get caught out." Fabrice regarded the peaks with serene confidence. "God will guide us through whatever weather he chooses to send."
"I'd still rather have extra food," Rutger muttered.
The sound of hooves brought Etienne's attention to the gate, where squires stood waiting with 3 stout steeds for Fabrice and the monks. The gate itself was already open, showing the long pass through the Carpathians beyond. "Time to mount up," Estienne announced. He helped Fabrice onto her palfrey, noting how she sat the saddle with practiced ease. No stranger to riding, then, despite her religious calling. With the rest of them ready, Estienne mounted his own destrier and led the way through the gate. The wind teased his face as he crossed the threshold, as though reminding him he was now beyond the frontier. Beyond the protection Rosenau afforded. Nevertheless, Fabrice seemed undaunted, riding along with her chin raised, an almost eager look to her. The trail wound between towering walls of grey stone, so high that Estienne had to crane his neck to see their peaks. Their horses' hooves struck a steady rhythm against the hard ground, the sound echoing off the cliff faces. The Carpathians had ways of making a man feel small, reminding him how insignificant he was in such an ancient place. A raven's harsh cry made Brother Gallien start in his saddle, and even Rutger's usual cheerful expression had given way to grim concentration. Fabrice alone seemed unaffected by the oppressive atmosphere, her back straight, her gaze fixed ahead. More than once, Etienne's hand strayed to his sword hilt, only to find he was reacting to nothing more threatening than a wind-bent sapling quivering in the wind, or a tumbling rock. But in these mountains, he knew, it was better to be too cautious than too complacent. The difference might be fatal. They reached the far end of the pass, just as the sun cleared the mountain tops, the rolling hills and wild plains of Cumania spreading out before them beneath the vast sky. The Cumans were already waiting. 6 riders sat atop their small shaggy horses with the easy grace of men born to the saddle. Their fur-trimmed coats were dyed in deep blues and reds, the colours stark against the winter-pale landscape. Curved bows rode in leather cases at their saddles, the weapons looking deceptively delicate compared to the thick yew bows of Western armies. But Estienne knew better. He'd seen arrows fired from those bows pierce mail and gambeson at 100 paces. "Stay alert," he murmured to Amalric as they drew closer. "But keep your hands away from your weapons." The lead Cuman urged his mount forward. His face was weathered as old leather, black hair bound in a single long braid that hung down his back. Gold rings gleamed in his ears, and he looked on impassively from a grim face. Fabrice guided her palfrey forward to meet him. What followed was a rapid exchange in their tongue, the harsh sounds at odds with her usual measured tone. Estienne fought to keep his expression neutral as he studied the men who had come to greet them. Each warrior bore the scars of combat. These were not mere herders or hunters, but veteran raiders. Most likely they had burned villages, slaughtered innocents. But he was not here for retribution. One caught his gaze and held it, dark eyes glittering with barely concealed hostility. Estienne would gladly have offered him challenge, but he managed to hold himself in check as Fabrisse continued her conversation. "The Cuman says they will take good care of us," Brother Rabel translated quietly, though his trembling voice suggested he didn't entirely believe it, "that their chieftain, Tarkan, looks forward to our arrival." The lead Cuman was speaking again, gesturing eastward toward a pass between two hills. His manner seemed respectful enough, but Estienne noticed his men had subtly positioned themselves to flank the three knights if things turned sour. Old habits died hard, it seemed. "I am afraid this is where we part ways," Fabrisse said, turning in her saddle. "I thank you for your escort. The Cumans can guide us from here." "My lady," Estienne began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "I know what you would say, Estienne, but these men are our brothers in waiting, not our enemies. Faith will deliver us." He wanted to argue, to point out how many men he'd seen die thinking faith would protect them. But he knew it would do no good. Instead, he bowed slightly in his saddle. "God go with you then, my lady." "And with you." She smiled, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that might have been uncertainty, but then it was gone. The Cumans wheeled their horses, forming a loose circle around Fabrisse and the friars. As they rode east, Estienne couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching them ride to their deaths. The last thing he saw before they disappeared into the pass was Brother Galien looking back over his shoulder, his face pale with fear.
"God will protect them,"
Rutger said, breaking the silence. The big knight crossed himself, his usual cheerful expression replaced by something more solemn.
"I keep hearing that,"
Estienne replied grimly, unable to keep the edge from his voice. He wheeled his own horse around and led his companions back along the pass.
"The Lady of Avallon knows what she is doing," Rutger insisted, "and the Cuman chief has requested this conversion. Why would he do that if he only meant her harm?"
"Chiefs can change their minds," Amalric said quietly, "especially when their warriors grow restless. If there's any dissent among this Tarkan's clan, he may just as easily sacrifice all three of them to his sky god." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Estienne couldn't shake the memory of those Cuman warriors, their hard faces, their predatory grace. As much as he admired Rutger's optimism, he couldn't help but think things would not be so straightforward for Fabrisse. They rode through Rosenau's gates as the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, to find Carsten waiting in the courtyard. He stood with his arms folded, as though desperate to disapprove of something. "Well," he demanded, before they'd even dismounted, "I trust our guests are safely delivered." "As safely as one can be delivered to a pack of wolves," Amalric replied, swinging down from his saddle. Estienne and Rutger did likewise, as stable hands came forward.